step back and just explain my background so it's not, I'm not an MD, I'm not a physician, not a clinician at all. I'm basically just a dude that has studied sleep, fatigue, and stress management, for over a decade. And so it's that's really an overarching thing that we should mention before we mention any of these individual therapies is the
Yes,
fact that
sir.
if you study fatigue and just, stress on the body on a cellular level and a nervous system level and just creating energy for the body, that's a really good foundation for any of this other stuff, right? So if you can concentrate on just reducing fatigue and increasing energy, increasing productivity, increasing functionality, that's the basis of what we're talking about with all this stuff. Um, and that was my
Homeostasis, right? We're getting into homeostasis and allostasis and all that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, balance, right? You want
Yeah,
balance, but you
yeah.
know, it starts with it starts with just getting the basics covered of how your body functions and how to make it optimal for the longest possible time. When we were growing up, it was probably not much about longevity as it was about performance like today. Um, Nowadays, people want to perform today, but they also want to perform tomorrow and be 90-year-olds and be able to, do stuff. So that was my struggle for, almost a decade in running float centers. I come from the traditional saltwater float industry where you had to have extensive build outs and, 150,000 per room, very low turnover, very high maintenance, high liability. And it was just about relaxation. It was just about getting you to a point where you were rested and more efficient form of rest, but also cumulatively getting you to rest easier the more you use the device. And yes, it's a wonderful therapy, but it was just very hard to do and hard to maintain that customer basis, especially when you're only trying to do one thing, which is relax the person. So yes, you always want to focus on that, but you also want to focus on stimulus. You know what I mean? I was always about cutting off stimulus, and that has its place. Um, but we're so overstimulated nowadays that reducing the stimulus just up front, they're just kind of in no man's land and they don't know what to do. Even if they're just sitting in a sauna, not doing anything, they're usually on their phone, they're usually listening to music, they're usually moving around or something. They at least have some type of visual stimulus to keep them a little bit occupied, even in something that's super relaxing like an infrared sauna, right? So when you plug them into the float tank, you unplug all the stimulus, all the gravity, all the tension, everything. Not a lot of people are prepared for that. You know what I mean? And so that became my whole decade's kind of independent research of how do I prepare somebody for the float tank? How do I prepare somebody to get relaxed? How do I prepare the body both on a cellular level and all the way up to organ levels and sensory levels, nervous system levels, everything to be ready for that experience, right? I'll say natural healing therapies, whether it's light, whether it's cold, whether it's heat, whether it's oxygen, using all these things that, creation has given us, but in the right dosages and the right timings and in the right orders to restore order to the human body. So that's what I spent over a decade studying, just with float tanks first, but now with all this other stuff. And basically, my kind of life goal is to figure out how to reduce fatigue, manage stress, but also build resilience in the human body. I mean, let's just pick heat, right? So heat is probably the best way to start the conversation, just because so many people incorporate heat into their own wellness routines. A lot of people, their foundational offering, let's say, of a wellness center is normally some type of sauna, some type of heat, because it's a really consistent and very relaxing stimulus, right? And we're talking about heat. So, years and years ago, talking about hundreds and thousands of years ago, people were heating up rocks in a little hut and putting water on the rocks and doing steam and what's called dry heat, which is just heating up rocks in a little fire in a hut, and then maybe pouring a little water on that to make steam and breathe that in to, break up some phlegm or, get some fluid out of your lungs, that type of thing. That's been going on for, since we were cavemen, right? And people know that it's helpful for numerous things. I'd say in the past, what would you say, 10 or 20 years, infrared sauna has become the thing. So that's the picture behind Victor right there is that's a typical infrared sauna. So those panels are going to heat your body up like a microwave, right? And a microwave is definitely a different actual wavelength. Infrared is much longer wavelength, but it functions the same, meaning that it's going to penetrate all the way through your body and vibrate your cells, the water in your cells in particular, to a certain point that creates heat from the inside out. So infrared sauna is super popular. I would say that it's the most relaxing form of therapy ever, besides the float tank. It's really good for muscle tension release, just physical pain. You will sweat, but it's going to take you a little bit longer than I would say in a traditional dry heat sauna that heats you from the outside in. You are going to sweat, but it's going to take probably half hour or so to get that sweat going. Whereas in a traditional sauna, you're probably going to sweat within 10 or 15 minutes. Um, that's the beautiful thing about one of our most popular products is called the Contour Pod. So the Contour Pod is what we switched to as far as our initial heat offering for a couple reasons. Number one, it's much more comfortable. I mean, you're laying down in the thing, you have massage in the back, it's a nice lounger style, so your knees are elevated and everything. Your head is out, so that lid pops down on top of you, and your head pops out of the lid, and so you're in control of the experience the whole time. So you have your face right in front of the control screen with two little holes out of that lid that you can pop your hands out and adjust anything that you need adjusted. And not that you need it adjusted, but you have that option, right? And so with the Contour Pod, we're doing two things that the infrared sauna cannot. One is you are much more relaxed as far as positioning of the body. It's safer, so your head is outside of those heaters, so there's a little bit more, guardrails there as far as trying to push yourself, hotter and longer. Whereas if you're inside the sauna, your head can get heated up, and that can be a little bit much for some people. There's two types of heat. So inside that little lid is both the infrared panels that you saw in the traditional stick-built sauna there, but on the infrared panels are various amounts of stones like jade crystal stones, quartz crystal stones, stones that are mimicking the dry heat from the ancient days, but in a more focused manner. And it's doing both the heating elements jobs, which is heat you from the outside in, causing that sweat, getting the pores to open really fast, getting the detox going on the surface levels, but also that infrared heat that everyone now loves, that will pay memberships just for the infrared heat sometimes. You're getting that now in a really controlled dose because that lid is right over top of you. So you're not moving around, you're not, getting uneven heat pockets or anything. You're getting that, like a toaster right in front of your body, making sure that you're getting heated from the inside out and the outside in at the same time. So it's a much more deliverable, consistent dose of heat. And it combines a lot of other little, accessories in there that you're not getting with other traditional saunas, right? So you're getting light therapy. Obviously, you see the red light there, but we also have a little bit of green and blue. You're getting vibrational massage in the seat, so it's much more relaxing during the session. There's an oxygen concentrator there that's optional if you want to be breathing in oxygen while you're getting the heat therapy. There's a lot of studies on that. Those things are very good together. And if you want to take it to the absolute, top level, you can actually put resistance bands in the pod and actually be exercising while you're doing all this. So there is enough room in there for, an NBA sized guy, athlete to be not just delivering the sauna and light benefits and massage benefits, but also getting what's called exercise with oxygen therapy and heat. So there's a lot going on there. And as far as stimulus and as far as bang for your buck for one modality, one room, you're not going to find, I would say, more options happening than the Contour Pod.
And then here's the one thing I'm curious about. Should you hydrate before you? So if you're wanting to get the maximum out of that infrared, because so many people go into all these different infrared things, they have them in front of their faces, blanket, whatever. There's so much. So one is what is really a good quality of red light? And then before you're going to get the maximum benefit of that, is there anything you should eat, drink, sleep, whatever you should do before?
You should always be hydrating. And when you're talking about heat, when you're talking about heating up, especially with dual heat, getting your skin going and the inside out with the infrared, you need to hydrate before, sometimes during and after. And that is probably the number one thing that you need to concentrate on is down in a whole bottle of water before you get in there. Some people, if it's their first time, if it's the grandma test, right, they might need to pop that lid off and take a drink while they're in there. You know what I mean? And then obviously afterward and the rest of the day, hydration is key. Um, There is something to be said about the light options with the Contour Pod compared to the next level of our therapies, which is the red light bed or the light bed. Um, should I talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure.
So you are getting some light benefits with the Contour Pod. Don't forget that. And you are getting a synergy there with the heat and the light, meaning that since you are being heated up, a lot of the blood, a lot of the pores are opening, a lot of the, bodily fluids are coming to the surface more that are theoretically going to benefit more from the light coming from the Contour Pod. Now, that being said, there's only about, I would say, a few hundred of those LEDs in the Contour Pod compared to the 40 some thousand that are in the LED bed, right? And so the LED bed, or light bed as I call it, it's not just red light anymore. We include green and blue in certain cases, and we can go into that. But just concentrating on the red light for now, that is doing a lot of what the sauna does, but without heat as the primary element, and it's much more targeted to different different tissues in the body. So normally when we say red light or a red light bed, people will open up that bed and it only partially glows as red. There's a lot of them that it looks like that some of the LEDs are off, right? That picture behind you is actually an older bed called the Novathor, which is primarily red light. And so ours, for instance, it's going to be very bright, but if you look in there, it's going to look like some of them are off, which it should look like that because a lot of them are near infrared light, not red light, which is invisible to the human eye. So those, like we have six wavelengths, and four of those, actually no, it's let's see, three of those are near infrared. So that's half of them. Um, at least two, if not three, are going to be near infrared for completely invisible to you, but it's penetrating your whole body with that beneficial light. So this is going to actually increase mitochondrial function, which is the energy production center of most of your cells in your body, and it's going to increase that currently. Now, you do need to have an assumption here of lifestyle, right? You do need to have somewhat of a healthy diet. You do need to have somewhat of a regular sleep, circadian rhythm. You do need to have some type of movement during the day. So if you don't have these foundational things, really solid, we're not going to, perform any miracles with this light bed, right? And yes, it is, an $80,000 light bed, and it does do hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of return on investment every year for many of our customers. But a lot of these customers are health aware first. And you got to have that, you got to sandwich all these conversations with the fact that, you got to get the basics down first of your own lifestyle. And then we can accentuate and accelerate those health benefits with our equipment, right? So, yeah, that would be light.
Is there any type of supplements or anything you need to take to really get the maximum benefit out of this? Supplements, vitamins, minerals, or anything to get even better benefits?
I would say just stick to whole food and a whole food supplement, especially because our whole food nowadays is less nutritious than the whole food was 50 years ago. And so a lot of people will supplement, but your supplements have to be whole food based as well, which is it can be hard to find that. So I would just say, we can endorse different supplement companies all day, but for the simplicity of, someone watches this video in 5 years, I would say just read really good amount of reviews on the whole food vitamin supplements and also, eat as much, fresh organic whole food as you can, meat, vegetables, everything, just keeping that as solid as you can. The worst thing that you can do is, do ultra processed foods and, highly concentrated sugary foods all the time with no exercise, right? And it's hard that we have to have this conversation, while we're talking about all these other things that can do great for you, but you have to have it because people, especially nowadays, they don't comply with the healthy stuff, right? So you got to always be mentioning that. Yeah.
I think I remember you mentioned one time when we were at one of the shows that you needed like magnesium or something else for your
Sure.
body. So what was that point you were mentioning that one time that was really important to get the best
Sure.
results out of
Sure. So
this?
magnesium, everyone is supposedly deficient in magnesium. That's a big one that gets a lot of attention as a buzzword is magnesium. And first of all, you need the right type of magnesium. So Magnesium threonate is a very good one. Magnesium glycinate, I believe, and then magnesium chloride. So magnesium chloride would be the one that's absorbable through the skin, and then the other two are supplements. But as long as you're taking a supplement, it should have everything else in it, from potassium to vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin C, vitamin E. Everything should be in there, and it should be bioavailable. It should be made from whole food. And so if you're just
Okay.
getting stuff with crazy percentages on it, like, 18,000% vitamin C, whatever, that's great. But how much of that is bioavailable, and how much have you exercised today? How much sleep did you get the night before? All those things are going to be factors before this supplement is going to be a factor, or this light bed is going to be a factor. So you got to assume that you're already a few rungs up on the ladder of wellness before you start, picking and choosing what protocol is going to be the most bang for your buck here. So yeah, we can tell you all day to get in a light bed. I wouldn't recommend more than maybe 2 or 3 times a week to start out, because you might be toxic. You might have a whole system full of heavy metals. You might have Lyme disease that you don't even know about. You might have just toxicity from crappy food for years and years away. And so we get people a lot of times that will do, a double dose of light therapy, 30 minutes in there, and they'll feel great immediately because they just got a boost to their mitochondria. Their cells are being more active, they're getting more energy in the moment, but then they're going to go home and sleep. They might hydrate well, they might exercise, they might eat well that day, but then they might wake up feeling like a train wreck because we just shook up all these toxic elements that weren't active in their body before. And then they come back and they call you as the wellness owner saying, "Hey, I feel like I had the flu after this light bed, and it's your fault." Well, it's not our fault. We have to prescribe a protocol that's probably minimum 8 to 12 weeks with this whole diet and lifestyle, conversation,
Mm,
and we have to clean your body out, right? And we're not doctors, we're wellness, store owners. And we have to be real careful about what we tell people, because we can't be treating or prescribing anything, but at the same time, we see miracles happen all the time with people that do commit and do comply with the lifestyle stuff, the protocol stuff, the modalities, all that, and they see great things happen. They can see people go into remission. They can see people have a lot of their disease symptoms disappear, but we can't dare say that we treat this and that, because then we get into trouble, right?
Now let's move into another area that's like massively popular right now, and that's cold plunging, and people getting into the cold plunges. So I've seen so much of that, and there's one of the zero bodies that's the only one in the world dry cold plunge, and we've had some great experience with that. But just cold plunges in general, or cold water immersion versus, like the dry version that's being featured behind me right now from Zero Body and Starpool. So talk about especially for people low energy levels, stressed out, fatigue, anxiety, and all these other things. Where does cold plunging come into that equation?
So cold is not, it's so funny because when people think about cold, they want to avoid it, right? They don't want to be cold. And I was one of the people that I was in the industry. I was in the float industry, which is very adjacent to the cold plunge industry. And we had clientele that would buy float tanks and then go buy 8 or 10 of these cold plunges. And they tell us, "You guys have never tried a cold plunge?" I'm like, "You guys are nuts for getting in there. I would never do that. There's no way. I don't care what the health benefits are. I don't care if you turn into Superman off of Krypton after thinking, I'm not getting cold, right?" And, things happen. And so it's, you have different struggles that you deal with. So like for me, I was studying fatigue and sleep and energy and all that. But what I found was it always took a long time to relax and get people into a zone where they could just let go and float, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times that had to do with the stimulation from that day or whatever they're dealing with, psychologically, physically, as far as stimulation. What's a perfect precursor to float is actually sauna or cryo or both. Um, and I can tell you just from a personal experience that if you have, I would say, mild to moderate depression or mild to moderate, motivational issues, energy issues, stuff that, you just can't get out of bed easily, right? That's a great picture right there. Um, you want to you want to have a little bit of willpower to get in this cryo machine, whether it's a chamber, whether it's a cold plunge, or whether it's the new dry cold plunge. You really want to just have the choice made that you're going to do this thing, right? And that may take you 10 years, like it took me 10 years to get into a cold plunge. But with the zero body cryo now, I would say it's about 10 to 15 times easier for people to make that decision to try cryotherapy. So, for instance, we talk a lot about the grandma test, and if 75-year-old grandma can't do it or won't do it, it probably is not going to work in like a general retail setting, right? And so I can tell you this right now, we've had a lot of grandmas come through the zero body cryo, and every single one of them has good things to say. So they don't have to undress, they don't have to shower afterward, they don't have to towel off or anything like that. They can simply take, whatever outer layers off they want or not, kick their shoes off, take everything out of their pocket, get in there, hit the button, and in 3 minutes you should have measurable anti-inflammatory, pain reduction, but also you're floating. So it should be a lot more comfortable than a cold plunge or a cryo chamber. You should get a little bit more spinal alignment. You should get a little bit more muscle tension relaxation. But most of all, it should introduce a lot more people to the benefits of cold on a psychological level. And that's what we're really dealing with here. And that's what people in all the cold groups will tell you is they're doing it for, yeah, physical benefit, sure, pain, energy, all that stuff. But what they're really doing and what lives are really changing is the psychological aspect of not having to deal with kind of that monkey brain, anxious thoughts, kind of nagging mild to moderate depression, treatment resistant depression. So if you're on multiple different medications, if you've been to cognitive therapy, if you've been to psychiatric, therapy, I would mention this to your doctor and be like, "Have you heard of cryotherapy?" And see what he says, because a lot of people are catching on, and really it can't hurt, right? I mean, if the only way that cold therapy is going to hurt is if you got into a cold plunge and you did a complete like swan dive into a frozen lake or something. But there's so many fears of the cryo stuff that are now being shed away because of the zero body cryo, right? Zero body cryo is now the first time that you can just have a giant cold pack and wrap up in it and be floating in a cold pack for 3 to 5 minutes and then be done. Go on with your day, and you have all those benefits, the re-energization, the less, chattering monkey brain thoughts, and just energy and clarity for the day, and it's making it available for a lot more people.
Now, Johnny, I'm gonna add on to that one because when I first got to meet you in person, we were out in Phoenix, Arizona. Of course, it's super hot in August, and I got introduced to the zero body, both the dry and the cold. And I'll never forget reactions of people's faces when they would get into it. And then we did a couple of other events down in Florida, Key West, and then recently in Miami with Hofet and Alvaro Nunez and the 10X Health Group and Super Luxury Group. And what was amazing at the last event we did, they just absolutely sealed the deal with me on the zero body cryo dry cold plunge was I put 500 people, 500 people in 10 hours in this outdoors in Miami. Now, again, we were covered, but we're literally outdoors in Miami. Now, it was November, early November, so it was still very warm. And that chiller kept that water between 39 and 41, 2, 3 degrees the entire time outdoors in Miami with 500 people in and out of it between 30 seconds and 3 minutes. And back to your point, because you were there and you witnessed it, especially when we were down in Key West, we had people in super luxurious suits and dresses and everything else, and they're freaking out that they could get into a cold plunge dry with their best makeup, hair, outfit, wardrobes, and everything else on and get back out of it feeling amazing, just like you described a minute ago. That's what just got their minds going like crazy. And then recently, when we were down in Miami, it was considered the number one, experience from a wellness, longevity, recovery perspective out of all the participants down there. But just watching them, especially some of the speakers, remember some of the speakers getting in there wearing their best suits and getting ready to go on stage literally seconds later after getting into this to get inspired, get up. So again, no type of stimulants, no drugs, no anything. It was just that cold that made people feel so good. And one last point that you made that I thought from a business perspective was the most valuable of all that I don't think anybody still knows about that zero body cryo cold plunge that's dry is that what you said about the types of population? Well, hey, from a safety perspective and the types of people, I was putting people in there and not wrapping them, leaving them unwrapped. I didn't submerge them. I let them stay on top just to feel a little bit. And just some uncomfortable was enough for some of them. And they were like, oh, I got in and got out, but they conquered it and they took a step and they tried. And then they came back later and said, hey, I want to try a little bit more. So they were coming back. So there's the retention, the re-engagement, the opportunities, and they just kept coming back to it and wanting to go a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And it was so neat because you said it. We had people in there wearing sweat outfits, but they still got really good benefits and they still really enjoyed it without being to the extreme level of some very hardcore people like Alvaro. How long was Alvaro in there?
He set the record. I think he was in there for 16 minutes. So that's the max length that I had to stand there with him and hit the button again. And so he's a world famous athlete. He's a multi, year Ironman. He does crazy, crazy stuff with his body. Um, and his genetics, he's gifted as well. So, I mean, you're talking about not only someone that has the willpower to do all these things, but is actually genetically predisposed to be able to do really cool athletic things, right? And in that extreme case, um, he wanted to do it because he feels his best after cryo, right? And so and you're not going to tell on the surface level what someone's inner experience is, right? They got to tell you. And when he got out after 16 minutes or so, he's normally a really focused, involved, happy guy. But after 16 minutes of cryo, he was just like locked in like a surgeon. Like
Wow.
this is like midnight, after his whole show he's been on for 16 hours straight,
Yes,
and
sir.
he came out of that thing looking like he could do another 16 hours, right? And so when you do something like zero body cryo, yes, it's an initial investment, but that investment is going to pay dividends in a very short amount of time for a lot of people. So if you can get, the average person is going to spend 3 to 5 minutes in there, and if you can re-engage them as far as their, just thought pattern and ability to function in their job, I used to have to fight to get people into a float tank for 60 minutes, and usually it's like, you know, over that, maybe 90 minutes because they got to shower, they got to redress, they got to do their hair, all this stuff. It takes a very particular person to spend that time and effort. Whereas if it's a dry cold plunge, it's 5 minutes to kick your shoes on and off, and then you can put on your suit jacket or whatever and go right back into a meeting. This is better than coffee, dude. I mean, coffee at least has like maybe a 20-minute uptake factor, right? And coffee's actually blocking a chemical in your brain so that you don't think that you're getting as fatigued as you are. And then that's why
Mm.
there's a crash afterward. There's a crash after the coffee high because then all that built up chemical that you should have been, getting cumulatively throughout the day to get you more and more tired is now dumping in your brain all at once to make you feel that way. And you know, coffee's sold in churches, man. I mean, it's everywhere. You can't get away from coffee. It's the drug of choice for majority of people in the world. If we can take 1%, I mean, let's aim high and aim for 1% of the coffee market with cryotherapy. I mean, we've lived, purposeful lives, right? We can say that a lot of people have benefited without side effects with a myriad of other health benefits that cold can bring versus something like coffee.
And one thing you mentioned to me that I found was amazingly important, or just a key differentiator, was that in a traditional cold plunge, well, one, you got to get all the way down in there quick, whereas this one it takes kind of ramping it up. But the other thing is your head's out of the water most of the time, and what's on the back of your neck that's even more important that you actually get in the zero body constantly that you don't get in the traditional wet cold plunge. What was that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so you want to have cold, especially on the back of your head, if you are already cold adapted. So that it's more of a perceived shock to the body. It's not necessarily lowering your core temperature, but your brain is very sensitive to temperature changes. And so when you had like when somebody dunks their head in a traditional cold plunge, that's seen as kind of like the max out move. If you can dunk your head, you're going to get even more benefit and everything. And they're right in the way that if you are already cold adapted and willpower adapted and everything, yes, that can be more of a perceived shock to the system, which can equal more of a um, you know, energy boost and clear-headedness throughout the rest of the day, right? But that's not a lot of people, right? We're talking about the cryotherapy people, which is very unique, and then now we're talking about cold plunge people, which is even more unique. And we want to open up the conversation to grandma and the rest of the family to try cryo. And so, normally we'll put a little pillow, a little neck pillow, like at the airport, um, on the back of your head to actually protect the back of your head so the rest of your body can get cold, but the back of your head is protected, meaning that your perceived cold is just around your body, which is a little bit more manageable for grandma and the rest of the family, right?
Yes, sir.
So you want to be able to have that option to freeze the back of their head or to have that back of their head be on the cold water, but it's not wet, so it's not going to be a real shocking like thermogenic response that it would be in like winter swimming or a cold plunge, and it's not going to be like a cryo chamber where that the air itself is so cold that 360 around your body, you're feeling this a lot as far as a shock to the skin, and it's not going to be as I would say intimidating as either one, right? You can always just lift your head, right? And then put a little cloth back there, that little pillow back there and protect yourself. So it's a nice little option. I mean, you want to have that conversation with them, especially the first time that they do the zero body cryo. Is this your first time? Is this your second time? Is this your 100th time? Are you dealing with grandma in the corner or are you dealing with David Goggins? Because there's a big range of people, and I would say you're going to get 99 grandmas before you get one David Goggins.
What's the one nerve back there that
Vagal nerve. Yeah,
yep.
the vagal nerve, it actually starts from your brainstem, but it circles around to the sides and the front of your neck and everything. And almost everything we're talking about is vagal nerve stimulation because your vagal nerve
Okay.
goes throughout your whole body and goes back up and it controls a lot of different functions of your body. You know, a breathing technique or even singing or praying has been shown to affect vagal tone and be vagal nerve stimulation in a wonderful way. So, that's another freebie that you get with us is that we're not just going to try to sell you hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff. We're also going to say, hey, if you go and, sing your favorite song, even if you're not a good singer, but you believe it and you can do it for, a couple times or three times, you are going to get benefit from that. I mean, why do you think monks in monasteries, sing every morning together?
Mm.
Yes, there's of course a spiritual element to it, but there's also a biological element to it. These guys are actually changing their body chemistry by singing, and you can do the same thing passively with the zero body cryo.
Well, you in the beginning started with your history and your background starting in the dry float industry,
Wet
and
flow.
in the dry float, when you got into that, uh, there was the salt tanks and it was a whole process because I got into it and I'll never forget my first experience with it. I fell in love with it. I mean, massively in love with it. It was there's nothing else on earth I've ever done that I experienced that was like that. Complete floating, complete deprivation, no sound, no light, or anything else. Well, but again, there was the expense, there was the time, there was the salt, what it did my hair, and all this other kind of fun stuff. So when I met you in Phoenix, Arizona at the BioBiz Bash, and I got into this for the first time, I'll never forget. It literally was exactly what you said. It was like being back in that one, but being dry. First of all, not having to go and change clothes and do all the other stuff. But I guess the biggest question for me is, because there's so many amazing benefits to flotation. Not many people are doing it. But what I have seen and heard, at least from you, and you can share a little bit about it, is, whether it be military special ops, I'm seeing a lot of NFL teams, college teams, and others go this direction. And then back to the college student, the mom, the dad, and everybody else that are super stressed out, that are just overstimulated. Where does the zero body dry warm. This is a warm float. And what's kind of the temperature on this one? And tell us a little bit about what somebody could, especially with all the stress and everything people are dealing with nowadays, both mental, emotional, physical, just overstimulated. Where does the dry float fit into this?
Yeah, it's a good segue because we've covered heat and covered cold now and light and all these things that are stimulation devices, right? You are going to step into something, you are going to feel different right now with all this stuff that we have covered, up to this point. And the dry float or floating in general is the opposite of all that. It's turning that volume dial all the way down or as far down as you can get it to where all that noise is reduced to the point of being way off in the distance or gone completely. Now, it's not going to feel the same as a traditional float tank. Original float tanks are literal bathtubs of thousands of pounds of dissolved magnesium sulfate salt water that you got to be naked in, and you got to have earplugs in. You got to know where the light is and the door is and the filtration unit. You got to be aware of all these things. You're bouncing around for a while. It's going to take you a half hour just to like get used to the thing before you can
Yeah.
even think about relaxing, right? And for people like you and me, we might be able to lock in pretty quick and fall in love with something like that because we're prepared to do that. But I would say less than 1% of the population is prepared
Wow.
mentally, right? So the dry float is just a really, really great stepping stone into real, wet saltwater float therapy, A. But B, it also, just like the dry plunge with the cold plunge or the wet plunge, it opens up all these other doors for all these other people to try it, right? And we want more people to try this stuff because we don't want to be a niche business. We want to be a mainstream business, and we want wellness and what used to be called alternative therapies to be real therapies and to be recognized, right? And dry float does this better than any other therapy, which is turn that noise level down and introduce people to an environment where it is literally just them and nothing else. They can hear their heartbeat. They might even be able to hear their, eyes blink. You can control the environment actually easier in the dry float than the wet float. So with the dry float, I would recommend having a variety of different eye masks so that they can fit them, before you get in, making sure they're comfortable and that they can open their eyes and blink underneath the mask and still have blackout, light proofing. I'd recommend having a couple different types of audio so you can have over the ear, headphones that the gentleman has on there in the picture, but you can also have earbuds that go inside. You can also have personal ones, that they use. They can also have their own audio, on their own phone. Um, I would say have the audio encourage relaxation. You don't want to just be like listening to the game or something. You can do that, but that's a little bit, not recommended. Um, but the athletes, the special ops guys, the veterans, associations and all this stuff, they know the value of the therapy. And so when I get a customer that says, why would I get a zero body dry float? They don't understand the value of rest and relaxation. So this comes back to the foundational conversation you got to have about fatigue and sleep. So all of this stuff, literally every single product on our menu can be seen as a sleep hacking device, not a biohacking device. Because what is the only real biohack? Sleep.
Yes,
And people
sir.
hate talking about that because they go, "Oh yeah, I don't get enough sleep." Yeah, and then they move on to the next thing, right? They say, "Oh,
Yep.
what supplement can I get? What red light panel can I get?" And they don't talk about not getting enough sleep. So it's like you got to put your shoes on before you go out into the snow, right? Like you just can't do these things out of people try to build a house and they talk about the curtains first before they start digging a hole. You gotta focus on sleep. And if you know the value of sleep, which a lot of people do, it is actually becoming more of an awareness mainstream because there's so many problems. But the dry float does that one thing better than anything else I've ever seen, which is getting people to sleep and also people that can stay asleep longer and having a cumulative effect on sleep quality. The more they use
Mm.
the dry float, not necessarily sleeping in the dry float, you can. In fact, if you have the time, our special ops guys will do 2 or 3 hours in the zero body and then go
Wow.
right back on mission like they just slept all night. So if you have the time, please do that. But in the commercial setting, in the wellness setting, if you got a lot of, if you got the whole hockey team that needs to get through it, something is better than nothing. So normally 20 or 30 minutes in there can do at least, a good amount. of not just reducing the fight or flight response, which a lot of this stuff can do, but it's everything at the same time. It's you're reducing nervous stimulation, but you're also reducing muscle tension because you're floating, and you're doing it at the same time, which is different. It's different than an infrared sauna. Infrared sauna takes a while for you to get that mobility and that muscle tension release, and now you're sweating, so you kind of have to deal with that. But with the dry float, within minutes, you already feel this really significant drop in not just tension and like thought patterns and just the monkey mind being turned off, but you have this, it's called interoception, right? Awareness of the inside, right? And it's not just
Mm,
your thoughts and stuff, it's your body. It's going to be a lot to do with how I'm breathing, what my heart rate's at, what my eyes are looking at if I don't have a mask on. And it takes people, by surprise because they're not normally accustomed to having this amount of awareness on themselves. They're always
yes,
focused
sir.
on the outside. They're always wondering what's next and what's external that can feed my appetite here. If you can reduce your appetite with meditation, that's a diet plan, right? I mean, we're not dietitians, we're not nutritionists, we're not doctors, but if you can just introduce awareness to yourself with some type of therapy that speeds up the process of what would be, years and years of a discipline like meditation, the dry float is a good substitute for that. And these guys that are in college, banging into each other for a living or whatever they're doing, they understand the value of unplugging once in a while. And if they can do that for a half hour with the zero body, that has noticeable effects on their performance.
And you know, like especially I'm seeing a lot of uh, students of all ages, all ages, well too, where they just have such anxiety, they have insomnia and other things like that, and they really struggle because they're dealing with all the stuff of school and testing and everything else in their mind. But to your point, if you're in this with some type of mind meditation type music or something like that and floating like this, would that be a pretty significant help for them or option?
Yeah, I mean, it is, and I always say if it helps you relax and it's subjective to that person and they like it, absolutely use it. But as a general rule of thumb, I say try it without anything because
Yes, sir.
the less the less sensory input that you can get used to and be okay with, the better.
Yes,
Because
sir.
now you don't need that audio. You don't need that visual stimulus. You don't need the brain tap. You don't need the vagal stimulator. You don't need the float tank. You can, once you have used all this stuff enough to where you have entrained your brain and your
Mm,
body into, matching that breathing pattern, for instance, knowing that you can take some deep breaths and kind of get to that same spot that you felt like when you were in the float tank, right?
yes, sir.
And so the more times you use the float tank or any of this stuff, you should have that cumulative result psychologically and physically to kind of, in crunch time be able to relax and be able to kind of tap into those feelings that you've consistently introduced your body to. So now you can, at least find some restfulness in the chaos, I guess we'll say, right?
Well, so that's gonna bring me to another segue that I remember you mentioned to me once before, where if you had the cold and the hot, and you're looking for the best benefits for hormones and everything else, or just that contrast therapy that's big right now. You got warm on one side, cold on the other side, where you can go back and forth. Share a little bit about that one.
Mhm. It depends on what you want to do. So if you want to do, let's say, growth hormone, right? So growth hormone is naturally occurring throughout our body. Every morning we should have a little bit that comes off of us when we're sleeping, and it's the foundational factor for repairing all sorts of tissues and problems in our body. Um, bodybuilders will know this from back in the day that, if they were on growth hormone, right, they're going to get muscles, right? And it's not just muscles, it's this probably their bones, it's their tissue, it's their organs, everything. So you can overdo it, right? But if it's naturally occurring growth hormone, you can't really overdo it. So this is not a steroid. This is a naturally occurring effect of doing hot and cold um, over and over again. So if you've never done hot or cold before and you're an athlete that is trying to build muscle, let's just concentrate on building muscle, right? And you want to spike your growth hormone as much as possible, but not be on a supplement, you would do hot and cold multiple times, let's say 3 times back and forth, hot for 25, 30 minutes, as much as you can stand, cold for 3 to 5 minutes, whatever you're adapted to, back into hot, which is not doable with anything but the zero body cryo because you're not dragging any cold water into the sauna. So now
Ah,
you can do both those things, right? So from the cold back into the hot for another 20, 30 minutes, whatever, cold again 3 times back and forth, you're going to spike your growth hormone 16 to 32 times in that first session. So that to put that in perspective, what people are doing for growth hormone supplementation, like people injecting this stuff into their body, they're getting probably triple, quadruple. This is 16x to 32x, and it's naturally occurring. So you're actually going to probably be using all that growth hormone to go to different tissues, and you're not screwing up the hormonal balance,
yes,
right?
sir.
Because if you do that same thing again tomorrow, it's not going to be 16 to 32x. It's going to be less than that because your body's adapted naturally. You don't need that the next day because your body's already flooded with this and it's already
Yes,
doing
sir.
its job, right? So none of the stuff that we're talking about, it's hard to OD on any of this stuff because the purpose of all this stuff, especially when you're using it in conjunction or sequentially, is to accentuate the balance inside your own body. So it's not like something where you're just going to do sauna, twice a day, every day, and nothing else, right? That may have some slight benefit for like detox, pain, and stuff like that, but you may want to just mix it up, with cold, with float, with oxygen, with, all this other stuff because it's different building blocks for those engineers and the construction, crews inside your body to be able to not just repair the house, but rebuild the house to last longer, you know?
Wow. And then what about people just kind of, you hear them go from, like you just said a minute ago, cold plunge to dry sauna where they're doing contrast therapy. Why are all these people like doing contrast therapy if it's not for human growth hormone, which I don't think they know about that one, maybe, maybe. But so
Right.
what is the main reason why people are doing contrast therapy nowadays?
That's a great question. The reason why people are doing hot and cold is because of the experiential value of the therapies, especially when they are combined. They want to feel good right now, not later, right now. So when that customer gets out of the room, they feel amazing, like $100. And they should not have an expectation that is less than amazing when you do hot and cold, especially together. If you can end on the cold, that's going to be best for metabolism. If you are ending on the heat, that's probably going to be good for beginners that are afraid of getting too cold too fast. And it's also going to be great for pain, in general. If you can do it, back and forth at least a couple times, even better for metabolism, and even better for blood flow. So we could honestly have another hour-long podcast just about blood flow and how each one of these therapies not just increases blood flow, but maintains blood flow, especially to the brain, which is going to be like we've had cognitive tests to show that just blood flow alone is going to increase your SAT score, you know? So if you can do this stuff, especially regularly and sequentially, um, there are benefits from top to bottom, inside and out, man.
That right there was a question. I don't think very many people know like just that specific of an answer because I've not heard that. I hear all kinds of stuff that's all over the place, but that was another bit. And what about hydration, like electrolytes versus just plain water before you're doing, both either the heat or going back and forth with contrast therapy? Obviously we agree, you want to be exercising and we're talking about quality movement, not just a lot of volume of something, quality movement. So you're not destroying your body unless you're an Alvaro Nunez who just is out there doing the extreme sports stuff because he just ran the race 7 continents in 7 days, 7 marathons, starting in Antarctica. But at least from again, because that's the one thing I see very where people really struggle with the hydration nowadays. So they're drinking a lot of water, but I see them end up going to, you know, getting rid of it quickly. Is it because the body's not absorbing into their cells, because they're missing some of the electrolytes or minerals, and so when they do stuff like this, it could potentially, have more of a negative effect than a positive effect.
Absolutely. If you're dehydrated, this stuff is going to make you feel awful. Like just
Wow.
100%. Um, and it's easy to just get this right. I mean, normally there's enough salt in our food that, we don't need to take supplement as far as electrolyte. A lot of people do. But a lot of people that will take the electrolyte as the supplement are normally on like a cleanse or like a vegetarian diet where they don't get a lot of salt otherwise. So if
Okay.
you have kind of a regular balanced diet, I'm not saying like cheeseburgers and pies, but a normal diet that has some salt on it. Like if you put salt on your steak, right, you're getting some electrolytes, right? I would recommend high quality salt like Himalayan pink salt or Celtic salt, something that's not just straight, table salt like the sodium stuff that's in most of our salt shakers. But yeah, I mean, to prov it, and one good way to measure this is if you are, a runner or do any sort of exercise or athletic activity, are you getting cramps? And a lot of
Mm.
people will do the sauna or the cold and they'll still get cramped up. So if you're still getting cramped up and you're doing all the stuff that you should be doing, that means that you might need some type of supplementation, whether it's potassium, whether it's magnesium, whether it's, some type of vitamin and mineral. I would take a full spectrum, whole food vitamin that's going to have electrolytes in it anyway. There's a lot of stories about collegiate athletes that would get cramped up, right before they have to do their event, and that you can't have that. And, normal athletes, they'll tell you, yeah, eat three bananas, before you go out there. Three bananas, that's a lot, you don't want to be carrying around all that, if you're running. Well, that's the difference between being cramped up and not. And you eat them, hours before, maybe say 2 or 3 hours before the event, you're not going to get cramped up anymore.
And one last thing to end on the dry float, while we're kind of visiting that one, is, I'm seeing a lot of people that are taking, you just mentioned it, IVs, or they're doing stem cells and other things like that. Would something like this be something where they could actually do, like be taking that while they're floating in here? So they're getting a twofer. And then what would be the advantage from a business owner's perspective and the potential client, if they're doing stem cells or IVs or any of those types of treatments while they're in a dry float? What's the extra advantage if there is one?
There is, and this goes back to what we've been saying this whole time, which is the foundational conversation of all this stuff is how your body's going to use whatever supplementation that you're putting into it, and it can't use it if it's not regenerating. If you're not getting to sleep that night and sleeping like an absolute rock for at least 7 or 8 hours, you're not going to get the full benefit of whatever you just injected into your body, whether it's a Myers
Mm.
cocktail for immunity, whether it's a peptide to build tissue, whether it's a stem cell trying to regenerate hard to regenerate tissue. The wellness stuff, the stuff that Next Wellness offers, which is all this different biohacking gear, is designed to provide the absolute best soil to grow all these other expensive therapies, whether it's stem cell or peptide or IV, all this other stuff. You have to sleep well that night, or else it's not going to be optimal, right? So you have to have a wellness routine, at least somewhat, to get the full benefit of whatever huge costly therapy like peptide or stem cell that you're going to pay for. I mean, a stem cell, you can just break it down scientifically, and a stem cell is going to grow a very difficult part of the body, whether it's like spinal tissue, whether it's a neuron, whether it's a brain cell. A stem cell, there's different types of them, but to go through all the process of getting an injectable or some type of stem cell therapy to begin that healing process, if you don't have all the foundational stuff already before you do the stem cell therapy will not work. And so that's just the core of it, you know?
Well, one of the things I think I remember you mentioned was that if they're floating in this and they're warm, does it, do they, like, they empty a bag quicker or they absorb it faster?
Yeah.
Was that another advantage as well too?
Yeah, it's actually two things. So you're getting vasodilation, which is the blood vessel opening, and so more of the injectable can come into the bloodstream, but it also relaxes the entire nervous system. So now instead of, you worried about what's going to happen, which can cause that blood vessel to recontract or constrict, it's not just going to open that blood vessel and allow the injectable to come in, but it's going to stay open for the entirety of not just the injectable, but afterward as well. So now you're getting that flowing through your whole system now multiple times, whereas if you didn't do that, you'd have less of a chance of that hitting you faster and better.
Because all I traditionally see is people sitting in a chair with some compression type boots or something else on, and it's a cool room, and they're having a difficult time even finding a vein. So that's why I was curious, for all these people investing the money and the people wanting the results and the benefit, it's putting them in the right environment. I just don't know that enough wellness, recovery, longevity type facilities, to your point, have really gotten to that. They understand, hey, if they're warmer, they're going to be better versus they just have the room at the same temperature as everything else in the whole building. And then they're putting these IVs in, and it's hard to find a vein. And then it takes longer, so it's more time out of their day, whereas this could accelerate the process, actually get a much better benefit. So back to the zero body dry float. And what's the water temperature in that typically or ranges?
Yeah, 93 to 95 is normally the sweet spot. If you're doing shorter floats, you can have it be warmer. Everybody likes the warm hug, without getting wet. So if it's mostly like a med spa model with majority, women coming through there, definitely have it warmer, definitely have it be, 20, 30-minute sessions. If it's kind of a mixed bag and there's all sorts of people, 30 minutes is nice, 90 to 93 is a nice sweet spot. If you're actually having people sleep in there like for hours, 2, 3 hours at a time, you actually want a little bit cooler. So
Okay.
85 to 88 or so is actually the sweet spot for that. And that's if you're actually doing a real sleep cycle, which is 90 minutes or more.
Yes, sir. Wow. There. I mean, that right there was a valuable gold nugget or diamond or ruby right there on that one. So let's go to switch gears a little bit. Hyperbaric chambers, HBOX, oxygen, just can't get enough. No, this is the hard shell version right there. And then there's soft shells. I'm seeing people where they have them zip up and they try and get in with the wheelchairs and stuff like that. So kind of give us some of your wisdom and experience of you had to where does this even fit into it? Who needs this and why?
So hyperbaric is probably the most well-known of these therapies. And it's actually based on an accident pretty much. So there were submarines, 100 years ago or more, that guys would come up and they'd have basically mild concussions or what was called the bends, where they would
Hmm.
come out of these submarines and have damage to their tissues because they'd been pressurized all day. And so they'd actually found that putting them in a pressurized chamber at a lesser pressure, but it's more consistent, would actually heal their body with saturated oxygen. So when you're putting oxygen at a higher concentration completely saturated into the body, the presence of that oxygen throughout all the tissues basically does two things. It improves the functionality of all the cells, more so than I would say um, most everything else except maybe light. Light and oxygen are doing most of the same thing, just with a different mechanism. Um, and it's going to improve almost every other systemic function of the body when you're talking about the gastrointestinal system, the nervous system, even their eyesight can get better. So hyperbaric, it was originally for stuff like concussion, for wound healing, for treatment resistant infections, stuff like that that's prescribed nowadays for hyperbaric at, higher pressures. Ours is not at the medical grade pressures, but we are more pressurized than like the home units. So we're right in kind of that sweet spot for commercial value. So you can sell it at the half-hour window for people that kind of just want that general wellness, reducing fatigue, um, general functionality, feeling better, sleeping better, that type of thing. But if they actually have, a diagnosable problem or a problem that's specific to them, whether it's, you know, a some type of wound that's not healing completely, or maybe a TBI, like a concussion, something that would be, a prescription for what's called medical hyperbaric, they can actually get, I would say similar or equivalent results with our chamber, just without the medical oversight.
Yes, sir.
So you would do, I would say minimum 45 minutes, but usually an hour to hour and a half treatment for something that is, a specific issue. And you would want to do that, probably at least twice a week. We pair it really well with light. So if you can do oxygen and light together, you're going to really not just maximize each individual therapy, but it's going to synergize and be greater than the sum of the two. So you're going to get, again, with proper diet, supplementation, sleep, exercise, all that stuff, oxygen and light are going to be an absolute home run for not just speeding up the recovery time of whatever's going on, particularly with you, but it's going to have that cumulative effect of, preventing diseases, increasing balance, and just, increasing functionality in general, for the future.
And soft shell versus the hard shell, because I'm seeing some that you can buy for your house nowadays for a few $100s that are just pop up. It's in a little container, whatever else. What what about the difference between a hard shell and a soft shell version?
So soft shell, so that's a little bit confusing. So when you say soft HBOT versus hard HBOT, they're actually referring to the pressure. So
Yes, sir.
you can have what's considered soft HBOT in a hard chamber like ours, right? So that would be underneath 1.5 bars, 1.5 ATA atmospheric pressure. What's considered hard HBOT here in the United States is anything above that, which is medical grade. So you can actually try to do um, hard HBOT in a soft chamber, meaning, try to pressurize one of those zip up soft chambers like the inflatable zip ups. You can
Yep.
actually you can try to pressurize that thing up to 1.5 bars, but that zipper is going to wear out after a year or two. And even if it doesn't wear out, I've dealt with these things where it is a bear to get that zipper all the way up and all the way down for every person, doing that 10, 12 times a day. That is a lot of work. So, in our opinion, if you are in, again, that spot between residential therapies where you'd have to be in there for at least a couple hours per day to have any sort of effect, and then the medical side, which, is a lot of insurance and a lot of pressure. We're in what's called the commercial HBOT market, which is delivering enough of the benefit, enough of the pressurization to have what's called angiogenesis, which is the rebuilding of blood vessels and nerve tissue in the body. But it's not high enough to require a prescription from a doctor. And it's also a hard shell. So if you want to get super technical, we're actually doing the hardest possible soft HBOT in a hard chamber. So
Yes,
there's a,
sir.
a lot of terminology there. Basically, what you need to know is that we give the most consistent dose of HBOT without needing a prescription.
Yes, sir. That was a huge point you just made on that one. 'Cause again, and then from your perspective and your background, it's stacking these and programming these based on what you mentioned earlier. If somebody's got depression, anxiety, stress, whatever, insomnia, every one of these things could be mixed, blended, and programmed in. And I think that's something you do amazingly well. And my wish is that when they reach out and contact you or direct message you, and we'll provide all of Johnny's contact information, social media stuff. So you can reach out to him directly. But just kind of give you the idea, there's the programming and individualization of this, because like anything, it's like you start with a lightweight and work up to heavier weight. But some people just jump in the heavyweight and they end up injured. So there's where Johnny is like an amazing, specialist at that. And our chief science officer is why it's a blessing, a gift for us being with him. So a couple of last things, we'll wrap up this session is uh, we're going to touch on the cryo chambers, and then we'll talk about PMBF, and we'll wrap this session up because this has been unbelievable. But cryo chambers, we're kind of getting back to you got cold again, but now we haven't really touched on the cryo chambers. There's different kinds, obviously, the liquid nitrogen, which seems to be going away, not as popular anymore. And then there's, you know, this version and a couple other versions. And which one are you really, where are you really seeing the benefits of cryo? And I guess I should start before we get into this one area that you brought up, and I want to give you all the credit for this. And I thought it was amazing. Was you were the first person I've ever heard say you can use this pre-workout. So I hear all these people talk about what you do post or for recovery and all these other medical things and everything else. There's so many really healthy people out there that are exercising in fitness clubs and gym, and there's owners that have this type technology, and there's a few others that are missing from that mix, which we'll you'll just give them a teaser of. But pre-workout, give us a little background on some things, whether it's this and PMEF or whatever that could be stimulating that parasympathetic system, or sympathetic, I should say, sympathetic, to get them fired up before they get into a workout. So where could a potential cryo chamber, and just kind of touching on the differences of the liquid head out or in and all this, versions now, electric, I guess you would say, electric, in the big game now. So if I'm a business owner, wellness, resort, whatever it is, if I'm making a choice and I can get the benefits for pre-exercise, you can post and wellness and all of it, which one would you be choosing and why?
So as far as the chambers go, you're right in that nitrogen was just the way it was for whatever it was, 15, 20 years. I don't know how long cryo chambers have been around, but it was originally just liquid nitrogen that would turn into gas, and you basically fill that chamber with the nitrogen gas. Um, it worked for a lot of people. It worked for a long time, but there's better ways to do it. So now we do electrical chambers, and now even that's changing. So our two kind of, you know, best chambers, I would say, for this, that one is called the Storm. So it's made in Germany. It is wind powered instead of the traditional electric unit, which has a condenser and a water line and a lot more of a build out than you would in, with a traditional chamber. This is definitely more of a plug and play option. It does need a big plug, but it's pretty much just that one thing, and it has a big turbine stack on the back of it, which is just on when you're in there, meaning that when you're in there and you have the intensity at the value that you want it at, it's moving the air, not freezing the air around you. So it's a little bit more efficient and it's a little bit of a different feel, but you're doing the same kind of triggering of the immune response by getting your skin temperature down really fast. That one's called the Storm. So the Storm is a head-in unit, and it's wind powered. So if you are on the chamber market, I would definitely recommend, looking into this one. It's like I said, it's if you're going to go with a chamber, it's probably the most efficient one out there for being, a traditional, you know, cryo chamber. So wind power definitely a little bit more efficient than, the traditional chilling of the air. And it's got a nice little iPad interface so you can, mess with the intensity levels and everything, and also have, a big enough opening there to see the client and, make sure they're okay. Yeah, the Storm is a great product.
Well, and one thing about it that you were mentioning a second ago is the wind powered version of it. Because again, I experienced this when we were out at the biohacking show. People would get in there with their clothes and shoes and everything. They didn't have to have complete. They could get in there with a coat if they. So it's another one of those things where people can get into it wearing more clothes and adapt to it getting colder. They don't have to go in. They just so many people think they just got to go in with as little clothing as possible to get any benefit of it or to get started. And I've just never seen anybody like you who kind of coached me on, what, man, people can start with going in there with a jacket or sweatpants or jacket or whatever else as a starting point, warmer socks or anything else like that, and then progress to taking to thinner layers to no layers over time. So that was another neat thing I learned from watching people get into this at the shows. They were getting in their full clothes. They're like, man, and coming out of it and feeling great because they weren't wet or moist or anything else like that. And then we were discussing about pre-workout. You mentioned something about you could actually do this pre-workout because most people think of it only for recovery or wellness, but no one thinks about it doing this or something like this, and then stacking it with other stuff pre-workout or pre-exercise or
Mm.
pre even competition maybe.
Mhm. Yeah, so you can definitely do it pre-workout. I would say that you don't want to skip your warm out, but your warm up if yeah, you definitely don't want to skip your warm up if you're going to do cryotherapy pre-workout because cryotherapy is going to increase metabolism, increase awareness, and increase vasodilation. So blood to the brain and everything, it's going to get you more focused, but it's also going to take your core temperature down, your skin temperature down. So it's even more important than you warm up right before you blast out your personal high on the bench press, right? So yeah, you're going to burn more calories in your workout, but you have to be a little bit more careful about limbering up and doing a little bit more, you know, pre-workout sets before you just kind of roll into the maximum possible push, right? So that would be more for people that are focused on burning more calories, boosting metabolism, but also the psychological element. So you can't, people use creatine, people use caffeine, people use stuff that's even worse than that for busting out the best possible workout, right? Um, I think cryotherapy is the best thing to do, even more than I would say majority of the drugs out there, illegal and legal, because it's consistent. You know what you're going to feel. You can push yourself just to where you want yourself with cryo, and you're going to have that just locked in, focused feeling where, the float tank, it takes roughly 20, 30 minutes for them to turn the volume down as far as that the excess noise and whatever. But cryotherapy can do the same thing in about 1 or 2 minutes because of these giant stimulus that you're feeling, and you can't get away from it. So if you can force yourself to deal with this, it is a stressor, but it's a balanced stressor for you that you are building resilience toward, not just that stressor, but the rest of stress. So if you can give yourself just a little bit of stress in the form of whatever it is, cryotherapy, then you can build resilience to future stress. You can actually inoculate yourself or vaccinate yourself from a future, stress breakdown, a nervous breakdown, because you've willfully sought out something that your body can't tell the difference between. Your body can't tell the difference between a cryotherapy session and a fight with your colleague or something, right? That nervous system response is roughly the same. So if you can learn to adapt and even enjoy a modality such as cryotherapy, which is a stressor, it's going to bode well for the actual stress that's coming, in the rest of your day here. You're going to deal with it better. It's going to roll off your back and you're going to perform better because you've already dealt with the stress today, right? You're just sailing now. So once you've done cryotherapy, you're not just locked in with your particular task at hand, but you're going to complete it faster. You're going to enjoy it probably, and you're going to be more resilient towards whatever else can go wrong.
So how long should you do get into the cryo chamber before you actually get into the training side?
Well, you can go straight into the training. I would just say warm up.
Gotcha.
Just definitely warm up. Do some jumping jacks, do jumping rope, do some shadow boxing, whatever else you're going to do. The worst thing that you could do would be get really, really cold and then try to go to the bench press and hit your PR
No,
immediately.
no, 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 no. Yeah,
Don't do that.
yeah.
Don't do that. Give yourself 5 or 10 minutes of warming up, just like you would normally, probably, hopefully. But yeah, if you do a good amount of cryotherapy before a workout, you're gonna, double, triple, quadruple the amount of, metabolic rate and calories that you're burning and everything.
And you'd mentioned before too, one that's newer, and and I had a chance to experience this just recently, and I didn't have much experience with it, but until I did, I'm kind of almost on that hook addictive perspective with PMEF. So either pre-workout or in general for people dealing with all kinds of the things we just talked about, whether it's joint pain, uh, hormonal issues, and all these other things, if they're taking the peptides and stem cells and whatnot, or so just where's PMEF fit into this big equation now?
So PEMF does a good amount to the body, and it's using electromagnetic pulse versus light or cold or heat, everything else that we're talking about. So it's actually going to find that balance that we've been talking about, with these other therapies, just with that other mechanism, electromagnetism. So it's going to activate ATP production, energy of the cell, mitochondrial function, all the stuff that the other stuff does. But it has a particular channel on the cell membrane. So the cell membrane, it'll actually make that cell membrane open up and let in more nutrients, but also eject toxins and waste products from the cell. So that's one thing that PEMF has that the other things don't have is making the cell membrane more permeable, but also unsticking red blood cells to each other. So a lot of times, if we have sedentary lifestyles or poor diets or, just environmental factors, you can look under a microscope and see that our red blood cells sometimes are stuck together, and that can detract from blood flow. It can elongate repair times and recovery. You might be a little more fatigued because not a lot of blood is getting to the tissue as it should. Um, and PMF is gonna fix that. You can look at a blood sample before and after even 10 or 15 minutes of PEMF, and you're gonna see those red blood cells just kind of unstick and flow through the veins and arteries a lot more free, and get to the body easier. So I would say like sauna and PEMF, or PEMF, I should say, and then sauna would be great. Just like cryo and PEMF is great because cryo and sauna actually do the same thing, but they're using different mechanisms to stimulate blood flow. So if you can do PEMF and any of these other things, it's not going to be hard to add that to the protocol, and the benefits are going to be, through the roof.
Wow. Wow. And because I've seen people, so some of the different uses for PMEF, I heard joint pain. What are some, and you just like you said, what could it do pre-workout? So what's it actually doing for a pre-workout? We were talking about just a second ago. What does it do to help you pre-workout?
It should, first of all, numb the pain response. So temporarily, it should take whatever pain response that you might get um, from, overdoing it or something. It might numb that a little bit, not in like the opioid way where you can hurt yourself, but it's just going to naturally give you a little bit of a painkiller. It's also going to help with just general functionality of the muscular tissue. So you're probably not going to get as much of the lactic acid buildup as fast, if you're gonna use PEMF, pre-weightlifting, let's say. If you're a runner, it's going to do the same thing for that acid, in your calves or wherever else it's going to build up. Um, I would encourage you to use sauna as well, just to make sure that the blood is flowing throughout the body. But yeah, if I would say if you didn't have time for the sauna, PEMF would be the way to go.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I've seen like people putting it on their joints, whether it's their ankle, their shoulders, and stuff like that. I've even seen it around their neck. What's because they have like a mat, and then they have different rings and stuff. Would you just share just very briefly what the difference in all those
Yeah,
ropes and
yeah, it's more about a concentrated dose versus a generalized dose. So the mats
okay,
are going to have one big ring inside of it, and that's going to generate a magnetic pulse that's much bigger. And so that would be for bigger, your torso, your legs, bigger body parts. And then the loop, or the butterfly, as we call it, is more for acute issues. So if your shoulder's really giving you a lot of bad pain, or your hips giving you bad pain, or your neck or something, you can focus it in on that and get not only blood flow to that area, but all the benefits with the stimulation to the nerve, to the bone tissue. There's a lot of studies about actual osteoporosis, like healing bone tissue with PEMF, but that's something that you would need cumulative treatments for. So, it's none of the stuff is like a one shot, go
yes, sir.
home and you're done, right? You might want to do hot and cold once and feel amazing afterward, and that has tons of value. But the next day, you might wake up needing something else, right? So if you can do PEMF, if you can do sauna, if you can do cryo, if you can do float, if you can do them kind of all in one spot, hopefully at a wellness center, for a good price, there's going to be a lot of benefits, the more that you can invest in this with as far as time and effort.
And what about neuropathy? Would the PMEF help with neuropathy at all?
It will, but again, it's going to be a very cumulative process. So
Yep.
you're not going to necessarily feel anything on the first try. You may feel something on the first try, but I would want it to be at least 8 to 12 weeks, multiple times a week with PEMF for neuropathy. And I would want to pair that with sauna because I want to make sure that you're getting proper blood flow and that these, multiple pathways are, enabling um, not just blood, but all types of fluid and immune cells or whatever else has to get to that area of the foot, you know. And you also want to make sure they exercise. This is another little tidbit is, go get yourself a little rebounder trampoline and just bounce on that sucker every day. 5, 10 minutes a day, morning, noon, and night, whenever you can. I mean, it's going to do wonders for your balance. It's going to do wonders for your blood flow. And it's also going to, do wonders for stuff like neuropathy. Um, you want to be able to get blood down to your feet. That's just you need to do that. We didn't used to have this problem because we did manual labor the majority of our existence as a species. And now we have to do all these other things to make sure that we have the same health benefits as manual labor. Well, hopefully our stuff is, feels a little bit better than doing manual labor, but also you should get 100 times, the health benefits by doing all this different stuff, right? So I would say, yes, it does treat, or you will see results, with different things like neuropathy and, you know, Raynaud's disease, where you can't get feeling or blood to the extensive tissue like your hands and your feet. But a lot of that can be treated at home, and a lot of it can be, cumulative, not just a one pop. No doctor can just inject you with something and now you don't have neuropathy anymore, right? You gotta
Okay.
you gotta do a little bit of work here, and that's our ideal client is someone that knows that there's an amount of work to do, but that there's all this stuff that they can do to help.
Well, and you mentioned the sauna and the blood flow part of that. So where does something like the body styler or the compression boot, Normatec and others that are out there for that kind of blood flow, is it a similar, not the same for people that may don't have access to a sauna, but could do the compression side? Is it similar, not the same, helpful, not as helpful for the blood flow issues and things like you're talking about? Because I've seen them have the compression for upper body nowadays, well as the lower body or a whole suit type thing. Where does that kind of fit in the mix?
Yeah, so you're talking about two different things here. Blood flow is one thing,
Yes,
but
sir.
lymphatic system is another thing. So you got the blood, which is pumped by the heart, and so you always have some type of circulation. Lymph does not have a pump, and there's 3 times as much lymph fluid as there is blood fluid, and it's a one-way valve. So lymph only goes like this in one direction through your liver and through your organs out through the body. And so if it doesn't move, it gets stuck there and it
Hmm.
accumulates toxins and it can cause cancer and all sorts of stuff. So if you, again, exercise is king. You can't replace exercise. You always want to do that. But if people won't exercise or can't exercise, which is an increasing amount of people, you need to do something like the Body Styler. The Body Styler is a lymphatic drainage device made in Germany, and it has, I believe, almost 30 different compression chambers that squeeze you from the feet up to the torso like a tube of toothpaste. And it does it in a way that is very comfortable and very, pain relieving and all that. It's very relaxing. You can lay down and have it done to you. But it actually is draining the majority of your lymph system to get that lymph through the entirety of the tubes inside your body to get it expelled and released. So a lot of people will see like, an inch lost around their waist in one body styler treatment, and that's not fat loss, that's edema, that's inflammation. So you can actually lose you know, not just weight and get your body contoured, but it's going to release a lot of these toxins, it's going to make you feel better, but you don't want to overdo it too fast. So you do have to weigh the options of toxicity, right? If you're eating McDonald's every
Mm.
day, or you're not moving every day and you've got years and years of buildup in there, you're going to need a few of these treatments, and you might not feel the best after your first treatment. Same thing with the sauna. So if you have a really bad diet and you never exercise and you got poor sleep and you get in a sauna and you feel a little bit better when you get out, but then it's just like a train wreck of, feeling like you got a headache and your head spinning and you can't sleep and you stink maybe. That's because you got toxins coming out of you. Same thing can happen with a light bed. Same thing that can happen with us. Yeah, sauna, light bed, PEMF. It can happen. Um, anything. You got to be aware of where you're at as far as your own toxicity levels, your own lifestyle levels. It's going to hit everyone differently. If you
Yes,
are
sir.
some, most people are in the middle, right? And the middle people is what, normally is our customer and our client. And these people just need, a protocol that is minimum 8 weeks, I would say, for 2 to 3 times a week for all this stuff. Hit all the buttons. And, because you can't really, OD on this stuff if you have someone that's knowledgeable about it. Um, and you want to be able to, measure your own subjective energy level, right? How do I feel after week one? How do I feel after week two? And by week eight, you should be feeling like night and day.
Is there one thing, whether it's heart rate variability or another wearable tech devices, apps or things on phones for measuring some of this other than blood and other things like this? Is there something, the average consumer or client or something in one of these facilities could use to kind of measure their progress forwards or backwards or benefits from these?
Sure. Yeah, HRV is huge. I use HRV all the time. I used to do EEG, which is just brain waves, but now there's a lot of HRV that incorporates EEG.
Okay.
And a lot of it can be wearables. You know, pretty much any wearable out there, like Whoop is a very good brand. I use a brand called Neural Check. So there's ways to track it, but honestly, the trackers, I wouldn't even put any trust in any tracker before I do all the foundational stuff that we're talking about, sleep, diet, exercise,
Yes,
and,
sir.
and also do, the get out of bed test, which is how good do you feel when you wake up to where you get out of
Mm.
bed. You can track stuff all day. You can do all the blood work, you can do all this stuff and say, "Oh yeah, you're doing great." But if you don't feel good when you wake up and you don't want to get out of bed like right then, you probably have a fatigue issue. And that's the main thing that I study, and that's the main thing that I can tell you that we treat is, chronic inflammation, chronic fatigue, making the body fight off whatever it is, an infection, a pathogen, or some type of chronic disease in a natural way, and giving the body as much ammunition for that natural process.